1, 2, 3.
Hi, this is Hope.
This is Kareem.
Hi, this is Katie from Washington, D.C., and you're listening to No Meat Radio.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 55 of No Meat Athlete Radio. I'm Matt Frazier with Doug Hay, and today we are talking about paleo. Paleo versus vegan.
What an epic battle.
It is an epic battle, and that's what people probably are expecting this to be, because it seems to me that every vegan podcast has a paleo bashing episode, and I would imagine that every paleo podcast has a vegan bashing episode as well. But this is probably not going to be that. And in fact, I think this will probably be a short episode because I don't have that much to say about paleo. I haven't spent much time like trying to dissect it and find the weaknesses and to bolster the vegan cause. Because I think the whole battle is ridiculous. I think the fact that there is a fight is dumb.
I wish you would have told me that because I sharpened all my knives and came out here fully prepared with armor and everything.
Fight. Okay,
yeah,
right.
Dang it.
That's okay. We can still use it afterwards. We can fool around or something.
Sure, Holden would like to have a little fake battle.
He would love it if you did.
Put paleo shirt on or something. Yeah.
That would be good. That could be a viral YouTube video, I think. Okay, so paleo, my thoughts on paleo and vegan are summed up in a post I wrote about it called Why Vegans and Paleo Should Stop Hating Each Other. I don't know that we're going to say that much more here that is different from there, but I think it's just good to say it. This is not a research heavy episode, I wouldn't say at all. Not that any of our stuff really is. But I don't know. I think our viewpoint, I don't know, I assume yours is similar to mine, but I think that viewpoint is one that I wish were in the world more. Like this is something I feel more strongly about than. It's funny. Like I don't try very hard to spread the animal cruelty message. I feel like that is not a good way to reach people and convert them to veganism. Certainly, right. I would like it if more people were vegan. I don't think that's the way to get people to do it. People are more self-interested than that, and you're not going to convince someone to change their ethics very easily. So anyway, what I do wish is that people would stop fighting about this, because I think that hurts the entire healthy eating cause when it's paleo or vegan. And they're seen as opposite camps that have nothing in common and that can't coexist. But I think, and this is the message that is the obvious one, is that if you're doing either one of them right, and there are certainly ways to do them both wrong, then you're eating whole foods. You're eating, a ton of whole foods, and I think that more than anything else is the way to eat healthier. So when people ask me, how can I eat healthier? Like, what can I do? What's wrong with the way we eat now as a society? I never say eat less animals. I certainly think that we eat too much meat. I think more than is healthy. I think we get too much fat and too much protein in our diets. Not we, but people who eat a standard American diet. But I think the place to start, if you want to just have dramatic health improvements, is switch to whole foods. Just stop eating processed foods. And that doesn't matter whether you're following a vegan diet or a paleo one. And I think that's the most important thing that we just don't do as society has become more technologically advanced, and it's really convenient and easy now and cheap to eat processed food. That's what we do, and that's largely why we are fat and sick and nearly dead.
Before we get too far into it, should we back up and just kind of explain what our understanding of the paleo diet is?
Yes, we should do that. I think that's a good thing to do. And this is funny. I don't think a lot of people know this, but before I started eating vegan, and before I started eating vegetarian even, when I was on this quest to qualify for Boston, I think I was at this stage between my 3:53 second marathon and my 3:36 third marathon. I was doing Paleo Diet for Athletes, which is a book. I have it on my shelf right there. I like it. It actually has a really good section about eating before, during, and after your workouts. And I've realized since then that's because that's the section that they modified in the For Athletes version of the Paleo Diet, right? So they made what they basically say in the Paleo Diet for Athletes is that the Paleo Diet is great and it works really well, but in its strictest form, it's not very good for athletes because you need sugar as an athlete. And I think even some of that thinking has kind of changed, but they were saying, are you really, have you not seen it yet, Doug?
No.
Okay.
I'm over here searching, trying to find.
See, Born to Run right there, and then to the right of it is Slow Burn, and then the Paleo Diet for Athletes. There it is. Good. So anyway, but the eat around workout section I thought was really well researched and good and informative, and a nice in one place set of guidelines for how to eat for events that are 4 hours, for events that are longer than that, for events that are between 1 and 2 hours. So a very, very good comprehensive section about workout nutrition. And it's one that I've used since then, long since I've stopped doing the paleo diet, but I still like their nutrition section, which is why I've held on to the book. And for my big research project where I will one day bash the paleo diet and I'll just pull out all these quotes from there. Not really.
I just happened to open it up to a page that's talking about a vegetarian diet and everything that this guy has to eat. I assume it's bashing it a little bit, but that's,
probably. I don't remember that section. I haven't read it in 10 years probably. So anyway, that's our understanding of the paleo diet.
Yeah.
So what I understand the paleo diet in the correct actual good sense, not the commercial sense, not the one that has had the marketing appeal, because I think that's no denying that's a huge part of its popularity, is that when you have a diet that, at least in the short term, helps people to lose weight and feel healthy. And I totally agree that it does that. I think for a lot of people who eat, like I said, if they eat a processed food diet, you switch to a whole food diet, whatever it is, whether it's paleo or plant-based, doesn't matter, you're going to lose weight and get healthier. I mean, not as a guarantee, but in general, I think that happens. I think the paleo story, the idea that this is how our ancestors ate, and that we need to get back to that, that's a story that people want to hear, and that has really fit and resonated well. I think even devout paleos will admit that story isn't really accurate. Like, there's not one paleo diet. Right. That's a common criticism of it, and I think it's one that a lot of people admit. Like, yes, that's true, and they're still trying to distill the principles into, the best they can do, is what they say. And like lots of the vegetables and things they recommend, like they can talk about eating carrots, but I'm sorry. I think like a lot of fruits these days, the fruits that we have now used to be as sweet as carrots, like not really very sweet, but they've changed because we've selected them in agriculture and all that. So we've changed the food itself, so that a lot of the foods that, if there was a true paleo diet, or the vast array of paleo diets that did actually exist back then, that those they're just hard to replicate nowadays because we don't have those foods anymore. So anyway, I'm not trying to get into a criticism of it. Like, these are the common discussions I think that vegans put forth. And anyway, it's getting off topic. The main thing, the premise of the paleo diet is you're trying to eat like a caveman did, basically, for lack of a better term there. It's eat meat as much as possible, like wild,
grass-fed.
Yeah, right. Not factory farmed meat. So I think that's one reason that I'm more pro paleo than a lot of vegans are. Like, I think if in the same way that I think it's cool when somebody who eats a regular diet comes and says, "Hey, I'd like to start eating vegetarian one day a week." Mm-hmm. Right? Like a lot of vegans, this is not, I'm just pointing out a fact that a lot of vegans would say that's not enough. Why do that? And then they say it to someone who's going vegetarian. They say that's not enough. You need to be all the way vegan, or you're basically not doing anything right. My view is totally the opposite. It's like a tiny step in this direction is good. So I'm very encouraging when someone tells me that, they've stopped eating animal foods until noon each day, and then after that they eat their regular day. Like, I'd say that's a great thing. That's a great start. Right. I'm all for that.
Yeah.
So in that same way of thinking, I'm happy to hear that the paleo diet is encouraging people to eat this type of meat, instead of the factory farm meat. So I think that small step in the direction is better than eating the standard American diet that's encouraging factory farming. Mm-hmm. So, not that everyone follows the paleo diet that way, and I think that's one of the issues with it, is that my dad certainly eats this way, and I've seen him make this mistake. It's like he gets in the idea that meat is fine, meat is good, and then when it's convenient, he eats the sustainable stuff. But when it wasn't, and he's gotten better about this, but when it wasn't convenient, he would just eat whatever. It's like, it's meat, it's on the paleo diet, so
right.
So you stop being selective. I think what I like about being vegan is that it's harder to do that. Like if you're going to say it's vegan so I can eat it, you're going to go down the junk food vegan road pretty easily.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to pay attention to health, it's hard to get a good meal that's, I don't know, like it's just, you can't stop at a fast food restaurant. It's off limits entirely. Whereas for a paleo person, even though it's off limits on the diet, because there's not that hard ethical line that says I don't eat this certain foods no matter what, it's easier to make exceptions.
Right. That line of factory farmed versus sustainably raised meat is so blurry. And, even a lot of the grass-fed stuff or the free-range stuff, is far from ethically raised. And so I think because that line is so blurry, you see a lot of people flirting with the other side. And I think that's probably one of my biggest criticisms of the vegan diet is just, that people say that it's more back to their ancestors, but
wait, you mean the paleo criticism of the paleo diet?
The
right?
paleo diet, yeah. Right? Yeah, and then we'll go to a restaurant and order chicken because chicken's on the paleo diet,
right.
but I'm sure it's just factory farm chicken,
right?
Pumped with hormones and all kinds of stuff. Yeah,
and so none of this is to say that if you were on the paleo diet and you were super strict about doing it. And none of this is saying that there aren't people who are like that, who are really into it and are serious about it and do that. And I think those people who are doing it that way are, at least in the eyes of someone who is vegan, are doing much better for animals than someone who is not, because they are not they're not doing things that play into the factory farming and encourage factory farming and support factory farming and stuff like that. So personally, I think that's good. I think it's better than the alternative of standard American diet. And I think that's where I differ from a lot of vegans, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think it sounds like, I'm sure in the examples I'm giving, that to someone paleo listening to this might say, well, yes, this still sounds like a typical vegan bashing paleo. And I'm really trying not to make it that way. I understand that you can look at the other side of the coin and make almost identical corresponding arguments for vegan, whole food vegan and junk food vegan.
Sure.
Right? Like there's maybe a blurry line there somewhere too. And there's someone who eats fresh and organic and whole, but they still go out to a restaurant and eat the junky vegetables or whatever that they have there. So, I mean, I'm fully admitting that you could make those same arguments. And that's not the point here. We're not trying to point out why it's bad.
And I think that's a big criticism of any sort of diet, that you subscribe to at all, vegan or vegetarian or paleo. When you get so focused on those rules, then you kind of lose sight of the big picture, which is to be eating a healthy, sustainable meal. And as you're saying, that's certainly possible on a paleo diet, and that's certainly possible on a vegan diet as well.
Sure. So we were talking, that was meat. We mentioned meat. Meat is big on paleo diet. You're supposed to get it this one way. A lot of times it happens another way. But then you're also supposed to get vegetables, and lots of them, which is great. I think that's fantastic. It's way better than most people eat who eat standard American diet. So I think that's why I also don't hate the paleo diet. Paleo says, I think in the strictest sense, no grains. Mm-hmm. Since in the original paleo diet theory that was put forth, people that, in this Paleolithic period or whatever period they're trying to replicate, that they did not have agriculture yet. So grains were very scarce and things that just nobody based their diet on grains back then. Right. So no grains. Beans are similar. No beans, because beans are also something that we didn't really start eating until agriculture came. So that's my basic understanding of the paleo diet, and entirely whole foods. It's supposed to be. So right. No sugars or added sugars, no alcohol. I don't know about caffeine and what they think about that, but I would imagine if you're trying to be totally strict, then none of that either. Mm-hmm. So these are things that I think are good, right? I mean, not adding sweetener, eating as whole food as possible. Mm-hmm. Generally, I think those things are good. Where I disagree is that our bodies are not able to handle these agricultural foods like beans and grains. I've seen some evidence. There's a TED talk by a woman named Christina Warner, I think, that talks a lot about, gives a lot of research-based things and shows examples of people from this era who were found with whatever, barley or greens or something in their teeth, and like evidence that in fact they were eating these sorts of foods. I don't want to get into that, but I did want to mention that one just because I think there are a lot of people who, because paleo is so popular, like I'm sure it's more popular than plant-based, right? And we talk about them like they're two equal sides of a battle, but I think there are probably 10 times as many people who eat paleo than who eat plant-based.
Right.
Could be wrong.
Or at least say they do.
Right. Yeah. Because it's, that's way easier to adopt. If you're looking at, you're pulling someone off the street randomly, and who knows, not a big liberal progressive city, but just some random place, and said, here, you have to follow one of these two diets for now on. Which one's it going to be? Probably they're going to pick the one that has all the meat in it, right? Because that's just like most what people eat and what seems not that foreign.
Right.
So I think tons of people eat paleo compared to vegan. And I think there are a lot of people who find No Meat Athlete or just find No Meat Athlete via plant-based diets, that they're looking for vegan, vegetarian recipes and trying to find it. So they find No Meat Athlete, they're doing fine, and then they email me and say, hey, this is good, I feel great, I love this, but I'm starting to hear all this talk about paleo and how what I'm doing is wrong and how paleo is better. So that's the only reason I brought up this Christina Warner YouTube video. Because I'm not trying to, I know people have used that, vegans have used that as fuel to say like, so look, paleos, you're wrong, here's the proof that you're wrong. I'm not trying to do that. I'm giving that so that people who all their coworkers are paleo and they're telling them they're wrong for eating vegan, just so that they have some place to go and look, not to use as ammunition in the argument back against their coworkers, but just so they can look at someone who seems to be informed and has done research, and so that they can have some confidence that this paleo thing is not, it's not the end all be all just because it's been a successful thing, right?
Right.
So I'm terrified that this is turning into paleo bashing by people, and I don't want it to be that. I really want it to be a bashing of the battle between paleo and vegan. Like that's what I feel like they're both good diets. I mean, ethically, not at all. Like that's the reason I went vegetarian, was for ethical reasons. That's what it was, and it turned out that it worked really well for health, and I've learned a lot about it, and that's great. But that's the reason I chose it over paleo, was because it's in line with what I believe ethically. So in that sense, I think I couldn't do paleo. I wouldn't feel right. But as far as health of diets goes, especially in the short term, I think a whole food diet, no matter how you slice it, really. I mean, no matter what your nutrient mix is in there, if you're eating animal products versus not, especially if it's meat and not dairy, because even paleo, they don't do dairy. Right. I think you can get healthy in the short term eating a whole food diet. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason I keep saying short term is because it seems to me, and I admit I haven't like done a ton of research, and it's very hard to be unbiased about this sort of thing. So I think my attention is called far more often to the studies that show the better longevity of plant-based diets, right? So the Adventist health study, for example, which Matt Ruscigno actually knows a lot about because he did his graduate work at Loma Linda, which is in the same area. It just linked that these vegetarian and vegan diets, it was very easy to separate them from omnivorous diets, because among this population that they were studying, it was like the people were identical in so many ways, except for some of them, and a large proportion of them ate these plant-based diets. The others didn't. So it's considered a very good study. Anyway, it linked vegetarian and vegan diets to longer lifespan. And I've seen other stuff that has done similar. So where I'm admitting that it's possible that I have a bias in here is that because of what I do with No Meat Athlete, I probably get told about many more of these than the ones that would demonstrate long-term health benefits of a paleo diet. Right. And I don't know if there are any, to be honest. None comes to mind that I've ever really seen. But like I said, I could be missing that somehow.
I don't think that, and I may be totally wrong about this, but I don't think there are as many societies or as much history, I guess, with people eating a strict paleo diet for the long term, for generations, as there are with the vegetarian diet, vegan diet.
That makes sense, because paleo is a relatively new concept in terms of, not the actual people who ate paleo diets when they were paleo people. They lived back then. But yeah, so that's probably one of the reasons that there hasn't been it yet, right? Yeah. So it's inconclusive, I guess you might say. Mm-hmm. But I've also seen the links to heart disease of animal products. I mean, dairy products probably in particular in many cases, and paleos would agree that that's not a good food. Mm-hmm. but of eating red meat, for example. So I don't know. There are probably plenty of paleo counter arguments for these, but in my view, it seems like in the long term, if you're looking at long term health, not in the short term, what's going to move you towards your body's ideal weight, I think the advantage is to vegetarian, vegan over paleo, assuming it's a whole food variety. Mm-hmm. But of course, I could be biased there, and I readily admit that. Like it would be very hard for me to be unbiased in looking at that.
Right. And I think that I know that this is not the direction we want to take this podcast, this episode, but I think it has to be said on a No Beat Athlete radio podcast by me, maybe not you, but I can say things that you can, I guess. I guess one big issue that I have with the paleo diet is, sure, you're eating more whole foods, but it seems to me like people who go on that diet then end up eating way more meat than they used to, because they end up replacing the starch or the beans or whatever, the grain, with more added meat instead of the added vegetables. And that might be a total generalization of just the paleo friends that I have, but then they end up just eating double the serving of meat,
mm-hmm. And not more vegetables than before.
Right.
Gotcha.
And so that's kind of the from the ethical point of view and the environmental point of view and the the viewpoint of a vegan. That's probably the biggest complaint I have about the diet, that it ends up encouraging people to eat more meat than they did before.
Right. Okay. Which isn't so much a criticism of the pure form of the diet, right?
Right.
You're not criticizing, in theory, this would be a really good way to eat. You're criticizing that in practice, it turns out that people who start following this or try to follow this end up doing this different thing instead.
Exactly.
And yeah, so I understand that. That makes sense. And I bet there are discussions among paleos that there are people who probably say, this isn't the best way to do it by eating all this meat. There are probably people who are really into the vegetable side of it, mm-hmm. and say and probably criticize fellow paleos for not paying enough attention to that, because because the meat is more appealing and more tastes better and is more calorically dense and fatty, and that's, we're wired to want that stuff sometimes.
Right. Absolutely. And the same could be said about vegans, to when they remove the meat, maybe they just eat a whole much more rice or
and
pasta
many do.
Or something like that. Right.
Exactly. And I think that's the flip side argument there.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I think that the point that I'd like to make here is that when you criticize one diet, you can very often find a corresponding criticism of the other that corresponds almost exactly. And I mentioned this in an episode, I think it was in our question and answer episode, that with the internet nowadays, it's very easy to find the viewpoint you want to back up whatever it is you're trying to back up. So if you want to back up a viewpoint that paleo is great, vegan is bad, you can find it and you can cite all these scientific resources and you can put together a very strong argument that paleo is better than vegan. And if you want to do the other side of it, show that vegan is good and paleo is bad, you can do the exact same there and omit the certain ones you want and choose the ones you want and put together something that looks like a good scientific reason why vegan is better. So,
or you can listen to this podcast and get the definitive answer as to which one is better.
Exactly. And it's vegan. We're just gonna No. So one good resource for this type of thing, it just got my mind moving and I enjoyed it for what seemed to me fair discussion, is Dan Lieberman, who is the scientist in Born to Run. I think he's the one who headed up the team that studied the barefoot running thing. He has written a book, I think he wrote it about 3 years ago probably. It's called The Story of the Human Body. And the subtitle is Evolution, Health, and Disease. And I just found it to be a really interesting look at how we have evolved in terms of diet and other things. It's not all about diet. But there's some points where I guess the take-home message for me that I got from that book was that anyone who's alive today, assuming you buy into evolution, which I know I have an Amazon review about the No Meat Athlete book that dismisses it out of hand because it talks about evolution. And
really?
Yeah. Huh. Which is funny. I don't really read many. I read almost none of the reviews there. Somehow I saw that one, and I'm glad I saw that one because that's the for me the most humorous of negative reviews. So I'm glad that I saw that one. But if you buy into evolution, which I hope you do, it's basically if you could actually trace your line of descent down to the human beings, your ancestors have been in such different, vastly different environments, and where different things were scarce and different things were plentiful, and the body has had to evolve into something that is able to survive on this huge array of diets. So that's what I got of it, was that you can eat a diet that has a lot of animal products in it because a lot of our ancestors have had to do that, right? So there have been times when that's what was available more than some other things, and there have been also plenty of times, probably more times, when it was more about gathering than about hunting, and when the hunt was a rare thing, but most of the time it was the nuts and seeds and berries and fruits and everything else. So I enjoyed getting that message from the book, which is probably why I enjoyed the book. But I would recommend it. It made some great points about how it talks about how the concept that there was a single paleo diet is ridiculous. Talks about that, but at the same time talks about how often we did rely on meat. So by that same argument, I mean, it's when people tell you that meat is poison, I think that's ridiculous too. I think it's dumb. So,
do you think that the whole argument against the agriculture, eating things that we required agriculture, do you think that agriculture developed faster than we did? I mean, evolved faster than we did?
Yeah, and I don't think it's a matter of opinion as much as science. Like, I think from what I've seen, it seemed like it's possible that our bodies have adapted somewhat to agricultural the changes in diet from agriculture, but it seems like way more of our history was not that type of food. Okay, so I don't know, and I haven't researched this a lot at all. But my understanding is that most people probably rely too much on grains and things that are from agriculture, but that it's not like it's poison. It's not like it's just terrible for you. Right. Some interesting things I in the Lieberman book, actually, one of the big things he talks about is that in many ways agriculture can be viewed as one of the worst decisions humans ever made to start doing it, because once suddenly we had this way of producing food and making it so that our food supply was steady, then it became easier to have larger families, easier to justify having larger families. And once we decided to do that, we were suddenly trapped into, now it has to be agriculture. Because it was like, once we've done that, then there's no other choice. Then we've got to stick with this.
The population has grown too big.
Right. So we have to say it. So even if it turns out that there are a lot of disadvantages, and it seemed that there were a lot of things that went wrong with that agriculture has sort of caused us to do. It caused us to stop moving around as much. Caused us, as we've said, all the choosing of foods the way we want them. So we kind of lose some of these original foods that are not as tasty, not as perhaps easy to assimilate, but better because your body has to work to digest these foods. So we start to select those out of the population of foods. Anyway, I'm sure that I'm botching a lot of the way of saying this, because it's been a year and a half or 2 years since I read this book. But that discussion was fascinating to me in the story of the human body. So that's a book I would highly recommend if you're into this sort of discussion. Some of it was dry reading. It was not an easy book to get through, but I would recommend it if you like this kind of discussion. So the last big thing I have to say about paleo is we had my friend Ray Cronice on this podcast. We had him on here twice. But in the last time he was on it, he was talking about this new paper of his. And he and his colleagues put forth this idea of a food triangle, which is sort of a replacement for the food pyramid. I think it's sort of not a coincidence that they call it a triangle, because the food pyramid is actually just a triangle. It's not really three-dimensional. Right. But they weren't, I don't know. It's very different from it. But the reason that Ray and I first got in touch was he somehow saw my article about the one why vegans and paleo should stop hating each other. And what he got in touch with me to say basically was like that he's arrived at that exact same conclusion, that basically either one can be good for health in the short term, and that they're not that different because they're both based on whole foods. Now, what he's doing with his research is so much more complicated than that simple little way of summing up the explanation. And even this food triangle, just mentioning the food triangle by itself, is a very simplistic way of looking at what they've done. But the triangle, if you can picture it, And you certainly can look up that episode. I think on that episode we linked to his paper.
Right.
And we could even link to that in this episode if you want. But at the top of it, it's this single point at the top of the triangle that says nutrient-dense food. And that's the leafy greens, the vegetables that are low in calories but high in nutrients. And then down either leg of the triangle, one of the legs is fat, the other one says carbohydrate. And the point of the diet, protein's not on it because what they're looking at is nutrients at the top, and then the two legs of the triangle represent your fuel source, the fat and the carbohydrate. Protein isn't really a fuel. It's more of a building block. And Ray's assumption, because they're assuming anyone looking at this is eating a whole foods diet, assumes that if you, no matter whether you're eating plant-based, whether you're doing the carbohydrate version or whether you're doing the fat version, which is going to be the paleo, where paleo would fit in here, you're getting enough protein because you're eating whole foods. And whole foods, the assumption of this paper is that if you're eating whole foods, you're getting enough protein. So what he's kind of concluded, and again, I'm sure I'm being overly simplistic here, perhaps because I don't fully understand it, is that you can be healthy in the short term by doing either one of these things, but not both. So if your body, assuming you're getting the nutrient-dense foods, the leafy greens, the vegetables, the fruits, stuff like that, you can either fuel yourself largely on fat, which is going to be animal products for the most part, because olive oil and things like that, that's not fitting in here because we're talking about whole foods. Or you can fuel yourself largely on carbohydrate, which is going to be more the grains and the beans and things like that, which is the vegan side of this. And if you're doing one of those to the exclusion of the other, by and large, you're going to be healthy in the short term. You're going to go to your correct weight, feel good. But if you have too much of the other one, so if you're a vegan who eats tons of fat, you're going to have problems. If you're someone who's fueling themselves with fat, like a paleo diet, that's where a lot of their energy is coming from, is fat. If they eat too much carbohydrate, which could be this modern fruit that we have that's not the same as paleo fruit was, if they were to eat grains or beans, they'd be adding in too much carbohydrate in their diet, then they're going to have problems. So that makes it very clear why a paleo person would be justified in saying, yes, but this is too much grains, right? Like it's not just theory that grain is developed since agriculture, so it's not really something that we should be eating. It's true. Like if you're eating your diet, most of your energy is coming from fat, then if you add in a high carbohydrate thing like that, then you are going to not be as healthy in the short term as someone who doesn't. So that's what Ray's paper says. I don't think I'm doing a great job of explaining it, which is why I encourage you to read the actual paper. It's short. It's like 6 pages. Not a hard thing to read because this isn't their research intense paper. Like they're not trying to put forth all the research. They're just summing up the points, and it's very easy to read. It's interesting, informative. So I would highly recommend you check that out. And then the Lieberman book too. I would also that's a really good one. And I don't know. I liked both of these sources because I think they're both really fair treatments of this argument. They seem to be unbiased, and there's no clear winner in either one of these between plant-based and paleo. And I think to me, that's the state of things, that there's not a clear winner right now in terms of what is healthier. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I like that, at least to me, it seems that plant-based has long-term more of a link to more years of life. But like I said, I could be biased. I could have maybe, the things that I see that are given to me by, sent to me by people is going to tend to be more pro-vegan than pro-paleo, just because people know of me as someone who runs No Meat Athlete. So that's what I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was a lot of talking. But I think we've done a good job of summing up the attitude here that we have.
I think so. I think that was good.
Okay, good. When I wrote the post about this, the comments in that post are interesting. There's a lot of stuff that, I don't know, some paleo guy, I forget who, Richard somebody, wrote something there and put it on his own blog or like linked to it and kind of broke down some of my points and basically says, you're wrong, vegans are terrible, paleos are good. But then there were also plenty of people in the vegan audience, I don't know if they were No Meat Athlete readers or people who just found it from whatever, who made arguments that struck me as just ridiculous. They would point out how bad paleo was ethically. And the entire post, in the beginning of it, I said, like, this isn't based on ethics. Let's just look at nutrition and how the health does. And then there are people saying, yeah, but you can't really separate health and ethics because eating ethically means not eating factory farms, and then you're getting more nutrients from better. I mean, I don't know what it was, but it was just like it seemed to me that there were people there who were not able to understand, like, let's set aside ethics for just a little bit and look at these in as fair a light as we possibly can, just on the topic of health, not keeping ethics totally out of it. It seems some people are unable to do that, which is disappointing to me. But anyway, so I fully expect that there will be criticisms of this from people saying, how can you say such nice things about paleo when what they're doing to animals is so bad, right? By encouraging people to eat meat. And my answer to that is, I don't think they're, like you said, Doug, it happens that people might go to eat more meat than they should on this diet.
But that's not the rule.
Right. The rule, what the paleo diet is about, is if you look at what the paleo diet is supposed to be by even the modern people who are at the forefront of the paleo diet movement, compare their diet to the standard American diet, and I think hands down the paleo's healthier and better for animals than that one is.
Yeah.
So that's the point that I want to make here. I'm not trying to say that it's better for animals than a plant-based diet. Of course it's not. But I don't. This isn't about that, right?
That's right. So,
okay.
You may not want to go down this route, but as since this is the No Meat Athlete Radio podcast, do you have any opinions on how paleo versus vegan affect you as an athlete?
No, I definitely don't.
Okay.
I mean, I think we just talked about, was it last podcast, but we talked about Mike Arnstein had won something as a fruitarian, won the Hurt 100, right? I mean, and there are plenty of good vegan athletes winning stuff. There are fruitarian athletes, which I mean is as extreme as anything. That you've got someone who eats only fruit, basically, and some raw vegetables, winning a 100-miler. And I think you can find as many as you want examples of paleo athletes who are winning stuff. Right? And I don't follow ultra running closely enough to know, are there paleo ultra runners who win big events?
There are, yeah.
Okay.
Timothy Olsen is a perfect example. He's winning a lot of events right now, and he's paleo.
Okay.
But I think that my understanding is really, when it comes to the shorter stuff, I think that paleo actually lends itself pretty well, and burning fat lends itself pretty well to ultra running. But for shorter distance things where your body is really performing better on sugars as your energy source, then I think probably the plant-based diet would be a better option. If you're just running 5Ks, 10Ks, even probably up to a marathon, then your body's not going to be able to switch into ketosis during the shorter stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I just, like Scott Jurek, so you were saying that burning fat, that's sort of lending itself to paleo being good for ultra running, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying better, but I'm just saying that if that diet, if you're on that diet, I think that ultra running is probably you're going to be your best result from it. Yeah.
See, that's interesting, because I would have thought the opposite. I would have thought that, like, the strength and speed sports would be better for where you want more muscle mass. That might lend itself better to paleo, and like point out, Scott Jurek as the ultra running legend that he was for so long, and still is a legend, although he's still not competing at that level anymore. That he was vegan, and I feel like there are, among ultra runners, it seems to me that there are more plant-based people than there are, as a percentage, than there are in the general population,
sure.
Which would make me think that works. But then, who knows? And then you've got the MMA fighters, and it seems that a lot of those are vegan now too. And I would have always said, well, that's a strength and speed sport.
Yeah.
That wouldn't lend itself so well. But what you're saying, that would make total sense, that the MMA people would be into plant-based diets.
Right. Yeah, I'm focused more on getting the immediate energy that is required from a 5K or a 10K. That jolt of energy that you get from sugars and from glucose that we have plenty of in our current diet. That if you're cutting all that stuff out and you're having to burn energy, you're burning fat for energy on the paleo diet, then that's a slower processing fat.
Right.
Or slower processing energy source. So,
gotcha.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that this discussion itself about athletes is so kind of confused that, like, I mean, I have no idea which seems to be better. There's not any clear consensus. What this says to me is the point I made earlier, that it is remarkable that the human body can, on whole foods diets, thrive so well, and like someone can win a 100-mile race eating a totally fruitarian diet, and someone else can win a 100-mile race eating an entire diet that's almost polar opposite of that. except that it's whole foods.
Right.
So it seems like when you give the human body whole foods, and this stuff we're talking about in the short term, like athletic performance is certainly an in the short term issue. This isn't about who's going to live longer.
Right.
A whole different discussion there about whether you should even be running 100 milers if that's your goal, is to live as long as you can. It's amazing to me that such different diets can both be competing at the very, very highest levels of a sport like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's incredible. And I think I've never seen any kind of research about that. And I wish there were that research. And if anyone's listening to this and knows of some, I'd love to hear about it. But just something that is a fair comparison of different diets. And, that kind of controls for the fact that maybe there are less people eating certain types of diets, whether it's fully paleo or whether it's fully vegan. So that's the problem. You can't just look at all the ultra marathons in the world and look at all the winners and look at their diets, right? It's not that easy because you might find that, who knows, 20% of those winners are vegans, 30% are paleos, but then you've got to control for the fact that
more paleos
right,
in the world.
Coming in, right. Mm-hmm. And some of these people are going to change their diet because it's optimal for their sport. Like they would move towards the optimal diet in their sport. So how do you know how much of that is happening versus how many people are just eating the diet that they were raised with and it happens to work for that sport? So, I mean, it seems to me that it's a very difficult thing to study, and maybe that's why there's not that research yet, or why there's not been any that's really popular, but I would love to see that. And I think I don't know, but it's got to be done fairly. Like, I feel like you can, as I said, you can demonstrate just about anything by looking at resources and compiling whatever you want and being selective in what you choose to report. So, anyway, that's a frustrating question, I guess, is which is better. But to me, the evidence seems to be that whole foods is what matters for athletic performance.
And what works for you.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Like, people say Mike Arnstein, like, you point him out and they say, well, yeah, but he's Mike Arnstein. He's one guy for whom that works, and maybe that's just his body. I've also, and I think this was from the Dan Lieberman book, but I'm not sure, kind of got the idea that that's sort of overstated, this idea that everybody's different.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and like it's when you talk about, like, you don't think about different bears of the same species eating different diets. Right? They eat the same exact thing because they're bears of the same species. Mm-hmm. I don't know about humans, if there's more diversity within our species for some reason. Like, it's quite possible that there is. I don't know. But the point was, and I think it was 80-10-10 where this was. Yeah, he was arguing in there that people love this we're all different diet, or this we're all different idea, but there's not a lot of basis for that when you compare us to other species. So I don't know about that one either. I'd love to know more about that.
So many questions.
There are, and so few will be answered, especially not by us. All right. This has been good. A little longer than I expected us to go on this topic, but I'm glad we did, and I hope we've stimulated a few thoughts, and I hope I've converted a few people to my view. Not that vegan is better than paleo, but that whole foods are better than not whole foods, and the argument between vegans and paleos is stupid.
That focusing on the similarities is more important than focusing on the differences.
Let's be matchers instead of mismatchers.
Yeah. But now I'm going to go put on my armor and go and gear up for battle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, then we'll do that. Everyone else, thank you for listening. This has been a good discussion. I've enjoyed it, and I hope you did too.
Take care.
All right.